Welcome back. I'm Connie Sokol, your host, and we are called to create. And today we are thrilled to have a sweet, wonderful, inspirational guest, Ganel-Lyn Condie. Thank you so much for joining us today.
It's good to have an excuse to see you, Connie. It feels like before the world shut down was the last time I saw you. So it's good to be with you.
Then when we did lunch, I'm like, yeah, it takes doing a podcast to see each other. That's the world. Well, I'm so happy that I get to ask you things that you know, and you sit at lunch, you just don't talk about. Yeah. We were just saying that a second ago, like you don't talk about my book or things like that. And what was the actual journey for some of these things? So today, just know we are going to talk about all those juicy things. So stay tuned. I'm going to give you the official bio first because it is fantastic. Ganel-Lyn, as you know, is a popular author and motivational speaker, and she is known for inspiring others with her unique honesty, authenticity, and spirit. She has experienced healing from a major chronic illness and is the mother to 2 miracle children. We're going to hear about that in just a second. After the heartbreaking suicide of her 40-year-old sister, Ganel-Lyn is constantly working towards prevention and does so much beautiful work with that. She is a regular television, radio guest and hosts the popular shows Real Talk CFM and The Middle. And her talks and books have now encouraged thousands of people all over the world. She loves growing older with her cute husband, Rob, and aims to keep learning and loving. And she has a new book out, The Stewardship Principle, and we're going to talk about that as well. Don't think we get out of that. So let's just jump right in. Let's talk about so much of a speaker, an author, for those creatives that are listening. So much of the genesis of that is what they've been through personally and the message they feel so strongly to share. So let's kind of go back first to that major chronic illness. That is no joke. That is an impact that is so layered, depth and breadth. So take us back to that. What was happening in your life? How was it impacting your life? And then what led to the healing of that?
So thank you for asking. I would say this, my 13th or 14th book, I just had a Christmas book drop and a New Testament book for next year drop. And if you would have told me 8.5 years ago that there would be that many, I would have just laughed. But I've been married at the time of this taping 31 years and was newly married and we were both in college with no money and no insurance. And like all newly marrieds, I think we think our plan is going to go a certain way. We always say nothing has gone the way we thought it was going to go. And I started to have some symptoms that for anyone that has chronic illness or autoimmune specific, you know, that the umbrella is really big and the symptoms are varied. So for me, these few symptoms didn't they didn't add up to one obvious thing. But I was soon diagnosed with lupus and it went to my heart pretty fast. And I was told I had 10 years to live and we would never have children. And that at this point of taping, I should have been gone 21 years ago. And so the last 21 years have all been gifts. And my 2 kids took a while to get here. We fought pretty hard to have our 2. It took 7 years to have our son and 6 years to have our daughter. So infertility is part of our journey as well. And in that time, we went through marriage ups and downs and, you know, all the things. And fast forward, that baby that came 2 weeks early, 10 pounds, who's now 6, 7, and almost 25. He turned 13, and any parents out there of 13-year-olds know that we called it the angry years from 13 to 15. We loved him, but it was a tough time. And out of privacy for him, I kept it pretty close to my heart. And then he became a 15-year-old and started to find his way forward. I started to talk to other parents that had gone through a similar stage. And I was like, where were you? Where were you all that time? I needed one other mom who was trying to throw every dart at the dartboard to help her kid. And the needle wasn't moving and I was exhausted and crying in my closet and pleading with God to direct me. And then the stress in our marriage, and you know what I mean? And so honestly, the genesis of the very first book, I Can Do Hard Things with God, which is number 1 in the 3 with God series, came from that part of my heart of what if you need to talk to someone about your hard thing, but you don't literally know anyone in your neighborhood, in your ward, at work that is experiencing your hard thing. And so I wrote the first manuscript, and I'll just say for this audience specific, I ignored God's prompting to write it for 8 months, maybe 6 months. So I finally wrote it, submitted it to 2 different publishers, and had 2 rejection letters. And I'm going to say, because I love that this audience are creatives, right? If anyone is trying to get published and you're trying to follow a prompting, it's a long process for first-time authors. And so it can take 9 months to a year to hear back. So that was a very long process of waiting to be told no. And I almost quit after the second rejection. And I talked to 2 specific individuals that were very influential in helping me go forward. And so I went through a process and I did some revisions and sent it in, and it sat with the publisher for quite a few months. During that period of time, my sister died by suicide. Mm-hmm. And 6 weeks after her death, I got a message saying they wanted to go forward. They wanted to publish this and anything else that I wrote. And I share that really from a sacred space because the story that wasn't included in those first 3 submissions was Meg's death. Mm-hmm. She had not died yet. And that story is the very first chapter of I Can Do Hard Things, and has opened so many doors and conversations and important work that I will do the rest of my life. Even when I stop hosting shows and speaking and writing books, I will still be working in mental health. And I don't believe God could have come to me and said to me when I was so disappointed and I was so discouraged and I was like, God, why did you send me on that whole creative journey? Did you not want me to even publish? Did you just want me to have the experience? I mean, all those things, I second guessed all my promptings, and he couldn't say to me, Meg hasn't died yet. Like, what would I have done with that answer to a prayer?
Yes.
And so I share that with a lot of sensitivity because I very much see my sister as like my companion, my mission companion, I get to be her voice and tell her story. Her story has been spread all over the world, and I really see us as partners in that. And so that was key. God knew that I couldn't hurry and write in the wake of her death. I had to have a lot of that project 90% of the way done. And then I went back, I revised it and added her story. And interestingly enough, in the previous manuscripts, I had approached 2 other families with suicide stories, and both families felt it was too sensitive and they weren't ready to talk. Isn't that interesting? I never replaced it because the With God books are a compilation series. And so each chapter I either co-authored or ghost wrote or edited someone else's voice. And so for non-readers, they really love I have 4 compilation books, and it's because they can read one chapter and it's a whole story. And so that's interesting because I didn't replace a suicide story with some other family. I didn't keep looking for another family. And I feel like, once again, it's sometimes we see God when we look back in a story, when you're living it, when you're struggling, when you get another rejection letter, when you're grieving, when your marriage has fallen apart or your kids are struggling with addiction. You don't see God in all those stories. And the same with my lupus diagnosis. I definitely have experienced healing, but I'm not symptom-free. And I think sometimes we wait to create when we are symptom-free. We wait to create when every box is checked and we're in a really healthy healing place. I think most of us are walking around with some healing and some current symptoms. And so the reality is my children, my books, the shows I've hosted, interviews I've given, they are evidence of healing. They're miracles in my life. But I wake up every day with significant symptoms that I still navigate with chronic illness. Mm-hmm. And so I just share those 3 stewardships, my son's struggle, my sister's death, my chronic illness, and I believe God uses that. But when I stay in stewardship, I can see all the good stuff and all the hard stuff work together for my good. And that was a really long answer to one question. I'm so sorry, Connie.
No, that's beautiful. You just took care of about 4 or 5 questions that I had on there, and it was so organic. I love it. And I love what you shared, that reality, particularly I want to zero in on that for our creatives, that It's in the daily. You don't have a week or a month open up and you're going to Tahiti to write your book, right? Or to share the things of your heart. This is all part and parcel of your daily life, and you're living, you're learning, and then you're sharing and rinse and repeat. So for people who are doing that themselves, writing things or wanting to speak or wanting to do shows or post a podcast, so much of it is just take the next right step that the Lord has said, just do this thing. And then know that he's prepared the path and a person or a situation or in a meeting with acquisitions, that those things will take care of themselves. Can you share, just along the way, you've had a lot of amazing experiences and met wonderful people and shared these beautiful principles. Have there been any experiences that come to mind where, for a creative, so much of what we do is isolative? We write, we prepare the speech, whatever. We go, we share it, we come, we speak, we leave, kind of that, funny adage. Is there an experience that comes to mind where you felt like, I can see that this is making a difference, this experience with this person, or when I was speaking or sharing something and this experience happened and I knew that I was doing what the Lord needed me to do, and that helped me keep going? Does anything come to mind?
About 2,000 examples. I'm praying right now in lifetime to know which to share. One of the things that you just asked about is focusing on what I call the one. And when I focus on the one, whether it's at a book signing or a speaking event or taping a show or writing a book, I have to really stay focused on for the one. Even though I'm working with businesses and I'm working with sales reports and I'm working with organizers of events and those kinds of things that are number focused, God measures in a very different way. And when I stay focused on the one, number one, I become less discouraged. Number two, I celebrate other people in their success. The opposite of that is ownership. When I go into ownership thinking, then I'm very outcome focused. I go into comparisons. I take away people's agency, mainly my children. I get really stopped in the process. And so I would just say is, if you can make the one, for example, this last summer, because of COVID, I did very few book signings for quite a while. And this summer I decided, with the launch of the stewardship principle in May, that I would do a summer book tour kind of thing. I had to really keep focused on for the ones, because you go to these book signings, you set aside time. It's sometimes awkward. I always bring treats so that customers don't feel weird staring at you sitting at the table and they approach you. And what I have come to know after hundreds of book signings is I always have sacred conversations when I make it about the one. Number two, I would just say, I keep for the one messages, and I get them pretty much every other day, where someone says, I read your book today. I heard you speak somewhere. I saw your post on social media and it made a difference for me. And so I'm really grateful, because I got one of these for the ones last week, and she was so kind to say that she had resisted messaging me for 3 weeks. And it came on a day where I was really stuck in the outcome, and I was really stuck in comparisons, and I was really questioning my offering. And was I moving the needle in the world? Or was it just seeds going out in the wind that blew around and never fell on the fertile ground and germinated and produced fruit? And she just said, well, I just want you to know, like, I watch you on social media and read your books, and it's made a difference for my daughter who deals with mental health. It makes a difference for me. You've been authentic voice within a community that sometimes makes it look like everyone has the same wreath on their door and they're all doing the same workout and everyone's wearing the same clothes. But I ignored it for 3 weeks. And there's hundreds of people like me that aren't ever going to message you. And so I would say to all the creators listening, for the one that says something, it's like termites. For the one you see, there's 200 you don't see. And when you make it about the one, it is so satisfying. It is God's economy. That is how he teaches. And so when we make it about the one, I believe we're in a flow that is very divinely orchestrated. But the world is always going to tell you that I was just talking to an organization yesterday, the Cook Center for Human Connection. They're doing some amazing work in mental health, and they were prepping for me to do a live with them in a few weeks. And they've created this great free tool called parentguidance.org. And it's all mental health tools and information and therapy for free that parents can go to for any parenting mental health question with your kids. The thing I wish I had had 12 years ago, right? And I said to them, thank you for putting so much resource and energy into something I've worked at for 9 years full time. And they said, well, you're making a difference. And I said, well, there's days it feels like the YouTubers and the TikTokers that, dance cool and change their hair color are reaching 9 million viewers. And yes, I feel like I have had some measurable success, whatever that is, in impact. But it's discouraging when sometimes I'm like, my one book helped this many people, but this TikToker is reaching 9 million people, today doing this other thing. And so I can switch into that ownership outcome thinking 100 times a day. It's just a matter of turning back to stewardship. And what has God trusted you with? No one creates the way I create, even if it looks like my lane is right next to Connie Sokol's lane. Like I often say, especially in the LDS creative community, it's a really crowded swimming pool sometimes. Like we bump up against each other a lot thinking, everyone's already doing what we're called to do. And yet even the people that I get compared to and asked about all the time, like, aren't you like so-and-so, or why aren't you doing what so-and-so is doing? I have to remember that, like, I have a unique approach. And my husband and my editor will often say, it's just a signal that you're in the flow, that you're getting the revelation that the Lord is dispersing out in lots of ways for art, for book writing, for podcast hosting. Like he's going to make sure these messages that feel relevant get spread around. So don't try to be so unique that you're like, I have to create the first ever whatever toaster, right? Just do what's on your heart. And when you see other people doing something similar, take that as a signal that you're in what the flow of what God is seeing is needed by his kids.
And the beauty is that we all get to hear it in our receptive language, in the way that we can process it, hear it, and then start applying it. And that needs so many different styles because there's so many different people. So I love that, not comparing. And I love when you talked about bumping up in the swimming pool. It is such a joy when we would tread water together or help each other float and say, I love what you're doing. I'm going to let people know that you do X, Y, and Z, and vice versa. This is the worst thing that could happen in creatives, is that we compare and isolate and then compete, because there's no room for that in the Savior's kingdom, especially when we're talking about gospel principles. Being able to say, I love the way that you're sharing that, and comfortable in the way that we share it. And I agree, at the end of the day, there is that fine line walking of the outcomes and the one. And I don't know about you, and it sounds like you've had that same experience, but just focusing on the one, it's the outcome comes. It comes as it needs to, and you're doing the things that you don't even realize. 2 years later, there's this yield and this harvest that you did not even realize. There's a timing issue at play. There's all things at play. And I think that all comes back to what you have shown, which is trust in the Lord. He has prepared a more excellent way. So we just keep trusting him, partnering with the Lord. And we just say, I'm putting it on the altar. Here you go. Do whatever you want with it. And if 2 people come, if 2,000 people come, that doesn't matter. That's not the determinator for me of whether or not I'm doing my job for you. But I know that if I've done these things, I have shown up in the way you've needed me to, and then let it be what it needs to be.
Well, and I would just validate too, that it is human nature to go into comparisons. It is human nature to go into outcome focus, because we're trying to control the vulnerability that we're navigating. And especially with creation, it's vulnerable. And so we're trying to have some sense of predictability. And so I would just say the reason I wrote the stewardship principle with the voices at the end of each chapter of ownership versus stewardship is because you can choose out of that. So when you recognize your voice is turned into an ownership voice, which is comparison focused and outcome focused, and you start to feel that shutdown feeling of discouragement, then you get to use your agency to choose back out of that. And so I would just say it is human nature, especially as creatives, where we are functioning from a vulnerable place. We're trying to be authentic. That part of that is the vein of comparisons. And I think the best advice I got before the very first book ever was published is this author was very successful, quote unquote. She had published with a New York publishing house. And she said, please remember, no matter how many books you publish, there will always be an author that looks like they have a better marketing package. There will always be another author that looks like they're selling more books. And I thought, isn't that interesting? So I tried to remember. There is so much that has come from my journey the last few years where the hard things didn't stop and the creative process didn't stop. And there will always be, it will always appear. And I would just say, I don't know how long this stewardship, the way it looks right now publicly for me, is going to continue. For me, God is my boss. I honestly feel that as a steward in my life, that I know my why and I know my boss, and he's the boss of a lot of things, right? And sometimes he needs us to show up quietly caring for an aging parent, or helping a struggling child, or go through a divorce or a cancer diagnosis, or help a neighbor in need. And that's just as powerful and meaningful as the artists that create and the authors that write and the singers that sing. I mean, it all to me is about offering hope and beauty in the world, in a world that is often filled with not a lot of hope and not a lot of beauty. And so for me, the people that have made the biggest difference are the quiet ones. They're not on the front of a magazine. They're not getting an award. Think about the people that have made the difference. It's the grandma that always made sure she had cookies for you, right? Like, to me, those are the moments of life that matter the most. I am so grateful I get to create. I'm so grateful that for me, stewardship, You Are Magnificent, some of those books are the most personal parts of my soul. And I know that I came to earth to create them. I do. Just like I knew I was supposed to be the mom of my 2 kids and have my journey with suicide grief and lupus and all those, my parents' divorce and all those things. I'm grateful that I can stand before God and say, I went to earth and I did what you asked me to do. And it was hard and it wasn't easy and it was vulnerable and it was raw. And I know that if I hadn't seen some of that through, I would have had to make an accounting for that. I think as creators, we will be accountable and God will ask for an accounting. And if your talent is the one talent that you're embarrassed by and you've buried it, maybe it's time to dig it back up and ask God to consecrate it and see what he wants you to do with it. Because my friends that have overcome addiction that are now hosting podcasts about it, I just think what a beautiful example of where some of the things that we think aren't the beautiful things are exactly the things that we can create from and help other people.
Love that. And that is so true. I think that's where so much of that significant and signature creation comes from, is the things we don't want to face, we don't want to deal with, but we do, partnering with him. And then we turn around and share that experience to build the bridge for someone else. So wonderful. Thank you so much for all the life wisdom that you shared today, sweetie.
Thanks for letting me have full therapy and a recording of some of the things that I don't get asked in interviews. I just don't. I get asked about a lot of things, but sometimes I don't get to pull the curtain back and have conversations with other creators about this very personal, I know I'm talking to friends that get it. Sometimes I tell parts of those stories and people are like, oh, great, cool. But this audience gets it and they get the vulnerability of what I share is among friends. And so thank you for holding space for the conversation, Connie.
Oh, it's been so fun. And I know people listening, they're going to want to know what's the best way to reach you. So out of all the ways they can, what's the best way for them to find you?
So When your parents give you the strangest name on the planet that no one knows how to say, you get really frustrated in junior high. Then you grow up and you're almost 52 and you learn to appreciate it because you get to have a website or a YouTube channel or an Instagram account and no one has it. And Google knows exactly when people start to type GAN, Google's like, oh, we know who you're trying to find, that lady with the weird name. But my website has the links to all the platforms. So I'm on all the social pages and I love to get messages, especially from other creatives. But the one-stop place where you can find the links to all those places are on my website, which is just Ganel-Lyn.com. No hyphen, just Ganel-Lyn.com, and Google will help you find it because Google knows there's no one else. And
that's beautiful.
You want to have the name everybody has in junior high, but then you grow up and realize it's okay. It's a stewardship.
I think that's a life principle. You grow up and you go, wow, that became a blessing.
Yes, awesome. Exactly.
Thank you so much for sharing your time and your life wisdom today. And thank you to our listeners for listening. As always, if you like these interviews, then go below, rate, review, and subscribe. We have so many interviews of amazing, wonderful people. We have Lisa Valentine Clark, Jenny Oakes Baker, Gerald Lund, all the different journeys, all helping you to fulfill your journey of being called to create.